In this video, I wanted to show you 2 points about the wider version of what is often called the Indian seed bead loom, but it's actually a wire bead loom. And these are fairly inexpensive looms, and they actually work very well, especially if you do 2 things to them. One is on the side, these wing nuts loosen up and keep these rollers in place. And what that does is keep your warp tension tight. You would have the loom warped, you would have your warp tied here, and what I've found sometimes, you see that the roller pops right out like that. It can come right up. And what I have found that sometimes if I have the tension a little too tight, it'll pop up in the middle of project, which is a problem because then the whole thing becomes loose. So what I do, as you can see right here, I add a washer. They don't come with washers, but I add a normal flat washer. You could also use a split washer. There's some here. These are the split washers. Whatever type of washer you have. And I put one on each side. There's another one here. And what that does is actually keep it tighter. You would tighten both of these wing nuts at the same time on one end when you're tightening it to hold your warp in place, because it's a one common screw that goes through the wood. But what it will do is keep it tighter. And the other thing that you can do is, this is the wide version, like I said. It's 6 inches wide, about 12 inches long. And it has one, when you get it out of the package, it has one, little pin nail on the wood to hold the warp. And earlier tonight, I was warping something that had about 55 warp threads. And as you come down this way with your warp thread, you loop it around, you go back up, go to the other side, you come back. Any of the warp threads that were furthest away from the pin were popping up. Even though these springs are very good, for some reason they just kept popping up, and it got very frustrating because they wouldn't stay in the little slot of the spring. So I'm going to show you something you can do that will help when you're warping this type of the wider loom. Now what I'm going to do is, you see that pin is in the middle. I'm going to just mark with a pencil a mark on either side of it, about halfway between the pin and the end. And what I'm going to do is take 2 wood screws, small wood screws like that. Probably the shorter the better. I'll have to see which ones I have here. This is probably good. They're maybe a ½ inch long, but you don't have to screw them in the whole way. And I don't know how hard, this might be hardwood, so I might have to use a drill for a starter hole, or you could just bang a nail in, a finished nail, to start the hole. But what I'm going to do is put a screw there and a screw there, and I will end up having 3 pins on this warp bar, so that when I bring a section about this wide of warp, as I'm warping this, I will have multiple pins across the bar, and I won't have a warp thread that's way over here going to the middle and trying to keep the tension even. It'll just make it much easier to warp this type loom. I put the piece of wood in my vise. This is a vise for holding things. And I have a hand drill because it does turn out that it looks like it's hardwood. And I'm just going to put a little starter hole right there for each screw. I'm going to change the drill bit, because this is an old one, but that's basically what you're going to do, is use you know, I could bang a nail into that also and start a hole, but I'd like to do it so that the screws stay in there and I don't have to think about it after I do this once. So I'm going to drill 2 starter holes and put the screws in. But it's best to hold it in a vise like this, because if you don't, it'll roll all over the place. Okay, I've got my 2 starter holes in there. You don't have to go very deep at all. And then I'm just going to put the screw in. Very simple. Okay, I've done that to both ends of the loom now, and the screws are a little bit longer than I wanted them, so they stick up a little bit. It's not really going to matter when I'm warping this. If I wanted them to look better, I could even paint them and have cute little painted screws there. I could have used very heavy-duty thumbtacks. This is not quite a thumbtack, but I could have used some kind of very heavy-duty thumbtack. But I think a screw is just going to stay in there longer, and I'm not going to have to think about it in the future. I'll just know that it's in there, and I can more easily now warp this loom, starting here and using the extra screws on both ends, so that I have 3 sections of warp, 1 section to each of the screw or pin, and I'm not trying to have a very wide warp come to a pin that's in the middle. And these types of looms, some people turn their noses up at them because, I mean, they've been around forever. They're very common. They're also, if you have these 2 little things done to them, if you have washers on the ends, this is another one that's about 2.5 inches wide. Here's another one that's a vintage model, also about 2.5 inches wide. If you like to do, say, several bracelets at a time, or if you just work on more than one project at a time, they're inexpensive, and they, with the washers, and on the wider model with extra pins or screws at the end, they're easy to warp, they're easy to use, they're portable. I mean, look at them, you can stick them almost anywhere and take them with you. So I think they're a little bit underrated, and I think that I've been loom shopping lately, and prices are astronomical for looms that do just about the same thing that these do for beadwork. Almost all the looms I've looked at have 2 ends and a way to tighten the warp and springs or screws or something. So those 3 features, and these are about $10. The wider one is more expensive. I just think they're underrated, and I think that with just a couple of little additions to them, they're very easy to use and to keep the warp tight. One other thing is, when you're putting washers on these looms, even on the small looms, make sure you put a washer on each side. Over here, I just added one, and over here I added one. And when, or if, you're adding screws to the wider dowel, if you use screws, make sure you do drill a pilot hole and then screw the screw in, because I think these are hardwood. This, I don't think it's a vintage one, but it might be, and the wood is very dry, and without that pilot hole, you could crack it, and then it would be more or less broken. If you have very heavy-duty upholstery pins, might work. I have some of those, but the problem for me is that some tacks are fairly low to the wood, and so then you have to kind of slow down and watch exactly how it goes around the thumbtack and everything. So that's why I thought that I would put screws on mine. And like I said, washers on both sides when you're adding washers. This loom, I just worked it up. It only took me about 10 minutes. Much different from earlier when I kept having trouble by the time I got over to here with the warps popping off. And there you can see, you know, they're not really pretty, but they're functional. And the loom is warped with 65 warp threads and ready for a nice wide project.